It goes ping, you can start. There we go.
Hello, welcome to Putting Out Fires. I am Kat Crawford, and I'm also joined here with Kayla Holland. We both work together with Break Free Education. We're kind of a unique nonprofit in that we specialize in transforming schools inside of juvenile justice facilities nationwide in the States. And so we work with students who are inside of an incarcerated space. And we call those secure schools here. So it could be short-term, long-term. And so we get to work in kind of unique spaces where we solve a lot of problems to make education a success for students. And I'm going to turn it over to Kayla to start to introduce where kind of our framework came from.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. So we have a framework that we call Putting Out Fires, and we named it because as we go to these juvenile justice facilities in the U.S. and we talk to teachers, how are you doing? One thing they say all the time is, I'm just putting out fires. I'm just putting out fires. And that seems to be this term that people use for, I'm just stuck in this cycle of response of solving problems day in and day out. So we created what we call this Putting Out Fires framework. But before we jump into that, we wanted to share kind of how we got started on this path to creating a framework. There's a book that came out last summer by Dan Heath called Upstream, How to Solve Problems Before It Happens. And if you're into this, I highly recommend the book. It's absolutely wonderful. So definitely check it out. But the idea behind this book is that there are numerous solutions to a problem. And we often get stuck in this cycle of response to thinking there's one solution for a problem and we have to implement that one solution. But this book really opened our minds to the idea that there are lots of solutions. And it comes from this old folktale where there's two guys on the riverbank fishing, and all of a sudden a child comes down the river drowning. And these two gentlemen in this folktale do what any normal human being would do. They jump in the river and try to save the kid from drowning. And then another kid down the river and another and another. And before you know it, they're in that cycle of response, just saving one kid after another from drowning. Until eventually one guy gets out and the other one says, hey, where are you going? And he says, I'm going upstream to get the guy throwing all the kids in the river, right? There's another problem upstream I have to solve rather than the one in the moment. So that's kind of where this idea in the book comes from. So this idea of upstream thinking then is more of is not a destination, but it's more of a direction. There are a couple barriers to this idea that I want to talk about real quickly. One is problem blindness. When we think about problems in the course of our day, we're often blind to some real problems that take place simply because they've always been in existence, right? There are these problems that always happen. We're blind to the fact that we actually have this problem in general. And then the other one is lack of ownership. A lot of times people say, oh, can somebody fix this problem? I just wish someone would fix this problem. But when we shift that to, can I fix this problem? That's really when we can jump into solving the problem itself. So that's kind of the background of where we started. And I know we only have 20 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Kat to talk about our framework itself.
Yeah, thank you, Kayla. So one of the things, since we've fallen in love with design thinking, back to our Google Innovator days, shout out to WDC 17, we were thinking about, now we have all these potential solutions, and often we don't have a way to frame them to understand what we should maybe do next. And it's not that there is, as Kayla said, just one solution, but that the solutions are actually kind of spread across a bunch of different areas. So especially for those of you who love like a SAMR framework, this is very similar in our thinking, that none of these areas are necessarily better than another one, but they all serve really a different function. And so as you kind of move across the framework, the functionality changes. And it also is about how your response changes and how you're able to manage things. So you might have solutions that you're working on across all of the different problems that we tackle within our job space, everywhere across the framework. But if you had all of them in one place of the framework, that might be really overwhelming because they all require sort of different things from us. So in the extinguish, the problem is quickly assessed and addressed, but it might come back soon because this is kind of a quick fix. And it does require like a very reactionary response. In detect, the problem's been analyzed and assessed, but the solution is not a long-term remedy. So you kind of have more of an idea and you have some things in place, but it's not really going to, take care of the problem completely, but maybe for a short period of time. In contain, the problem has been sort of confined to a small space where it can like be further studied and cause minimal impact, but it's still there. The problem hasn't gone away. And in prevent, the problem's been completely eliminated, but the solution involves time, resources, and people. So in our next example, we'll kind of walk that through that analogy that Kayla shared with the folktale. So in extinguish, the fishermen are saving the kids from drowning, but that's exhausting, right? And there's only 2 of them. So how many kids can they save? And more are coming and coming and coming. In detect, maybe they're throwing out life preservers or they're hiring lifeguards to be available, so that there are more people and ways to kind of save and really anticipate this problem. In contain, we teach everybody to swim. So there's just no issue with anyone potentially drowning because everyone has the skills that they need to sort of solve this problem. And then in prevent, well, we could take all of the water out of the river so no one ever drowns again, right? It's kind of a silly solution, but it's a possibility. If we never wanted anyone to drown, we'll just get rid of all the water, right? And let's give you kind of a walkthrough of what this might look like. So I'm going to actually share my screen and we're going to show you kind of how we do this with folks as we're going through the process. So here we go. So this is our Jamboard, and we're going to share a little template with you at the end if you want to kind of walk this through. We use this a lot when we're coaching with people and kind of helping them try to identify problems and think about potential solutions. So some of you might be familiar with what you're seeing here. This is like a version of the Gripe Jam created by Jenny Magura that's used in the Google coaching curriculum. We like to call it a gold jam just because we like positive words. So we like to start off with this where we ask people to just kind of throw out what are some of the problems that you're facing. And then next we would talk about like, how can we sort it? So I'm going to sort it and let Kayla walk you through a little bit of the sorting process as she's talking.
Yeah, so we typically start with, and you can do this on your own, not in this 20-minute explanation, but on your own time. You write down one problem per sticky note, and then you move these sticky notes around. So you create a horizontal line based off how frustrating the sticky note is. You can see our graph on the bottom, less frustrating to the right, more frustrating to the left. So you create that line and then you move them up or down as Kat's doing now based off how many people are affected by that problem. Then your next step is to annotate the ones you're really passionate about in some way. So star them, circle them, something. And that tends to give us a focus area to start in that upper left quadrant, which she's going to highlight. Our students are really struggling with mental health. So that's going to be our problem that we're going to walk through in this example. But that kind of gives you that focus problem to start. It's a problem that's really frustrating for you, and it's a problem that affects the most people. And it's one that you're really passionate about solving. So once you have your problem, then we like to have you create an empathy map. Where you really look deep into your user, and I think Kat's going to explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I use this framework a lot with my coaching that I do with teachers and with administrators. And one of the things that I'll say is I do a couple of empathy maps because I always want people to look at the problem through multiple clients' eyes. And so for this one, even though I was working with a principal when we kind of came up with some of the examples we're sharing here, we were thinking about what would it feel like to be a counselor who is facing this issue, and how can we think about what counselors are dealing with right now. And so, we're thinking about the fact that they're really stretched thin, that they have, get pulled into emergency meetings all the time. They're thinking, why can't we hire more people? I've just so many problems, and I just can't handle the influx of kids that are kind of coming at me. And so sometimes I'll duplicate this slide and just use it over and over again to think about, well, then how's this problem framed from the student's perspective, from the parent's perspective, from my perspective in my role as an administrator, whatever, we're kind of trying to understand it from a couple different spaces. And from there, we do move into trying to construct some type of how might we really narrow down, like, who is that client that we want to focus on, and what possible solutions do we think we can come up with for them. And I like to kind of combine this with this little blooms down here. So whenever I share how might we kind of activity, I always bring in this blooms. It really helps those who have an education background understand what possibilities we could be adding up here in our action statement. So for this one, we're saying, how might we support the increased mental health demands for students in order to create a safe school environment? And it actually kind of ended up merging when we were doing this, like two ideas together, because safety was a concern for this teacher as well, or for this administrator, as well as the increased mental health demands on students. So yeah, go ahead.
What I love so much about the how might we statement is that when we work through this with teachers who maybe have never done design thinking before, this really helps them take this kind of broad problem that they're experiencing and really puts it into an action statement that then we can build solutions on. And so this is this one step that really helps them kind of move it from, this is this broad problem that I'm experiencing. Now here's my one action statement. So for the rest of our training, we're going to continuously look back at this how might we statement. And it really helps teachers focus in on what is exactly what I'm wanting to do. And we often, I was doing a training with this specifically in Nebraska just a couple of days ago, and a teacher used the term effective and meaningful. So when we got to solutions, he kept saying, like, and he listed a couple of things, and we're able to go back and say, okay, but the words you chose were effective and meaningful. So which of your solutions are matching those words? So it really helps kind of narrow some of those broad problems that teachers bring.
Absolutely. And the piece that's missing in this process for our example today is now going to be sort of some type of iterative activity to come up with a series of solutions. In our next slide, you're going to see solutions that we've come up with and kind of spread across the framework. And we were actually just talking this morning about something that we see a lot in iteration is we love to do a crazy 8. Sometimes we only do a crazy 4. Especially when you're working with, sort of people who are just starting divergent thinking. But we find it's better to do some of those things in groupthink or in paired activities, because often a lot of pressure to come up with so many solutions by one person is a challenge. And so the more people that you involve in that process, the larger variety and sort of diverse solutions that you end up with. So this is an example of how we would then take all of those iterated solutions and spread them out across the framework. So on the far right-hand side of extinguish, students are causing a safety concern at school. It's like this problem is just out of control, and all I'm doing is just responding to every single safety concern, like all the time. It's just constantly coming at me, and I'm just doing my best. And for a lot of places, this is where we are, right? We're just, as it comes in, we're responding to it, and we're just very reactionary. But one step that you could take that might fall somewhere between detect and extinguish would be to limit a counselor's responsibilities to just counseling, right? And be able to divvy out some of those other things to free up their ability to address some of these concerns and be available to a larger number of students. Maybe under detect, you could train the teachers to supplement the counseling needs of the students. That was actually brought up at a district I was working with. They were going to provide additional training. Some of the teachers were excited about it because they really wanted to support their students, and others were like, that's not what I signed up for, So there would be a lot of things you'd have to do to put something like that into place. Maybe you could have a screening for students 2 months, every 2 months for mental health concerns. And it just became part of the sort of mental health assessment process that you built into the framework of your school. And that just helped you detect things before they became a bigger issue. Contain, maybe hiring more counselors says we're not going to necessarily get rid of the mental health needs, but we're going to have a larger sort of we're going to circle around this problem and contain it by having more help and not letting it kind of get out of control. Purchase an online counseling app subscriptions for staff and students. I saw this in place at a school that I was visiting where everyone had access to free healthcare. And instead of having a counselor meet with a student could go into like a practice room that was private and quiet and log in and meet immediately with a counselor if they needed one during the school day. Or under Prevent, if we could open a public and free mental health system that supports only schools. Now, of course, as you can see on the Prevent end, we can't be solving our problems on Prevent all the time. That would just take way too much energy. And so we really have to think about like which problems do we want to devote that time and energy to put in all the resources, all the people, all the money, and all the time to really create something that is that incredible. And I've seen things like this on a smaller scale. A school that I worked with in Kentucky had a teen pregnancy program, and they had a doctor's office inside the school. Kids never left to do their checkups. They never had to leave to go find like if they got nervous about something and they wanted to stop at the doctor's office and say, hey, I felt this weird thing or something happened. That was all built into their school day. They never had to miss out on educational opportunities for very long because they had to do check-ins or things were happening. And after they had their children, they were able to take them to school for the next 3 years, and their kids were able to see the same doctor kind of framework and go to visits with inside their school. And they never had to miss school for that either. So really innovative solution for that type of thing. And that's kind of what I had in the back of my mind when we were brainstorming this image. So I'm going to hop out of screen share here, and we're going to pop in and show you some of the resources that we've shared with you and kind of walk you through those as we wrap up today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one more thing, it's important to note that this is not a leveling up. I am going to put these links in the chat for you. This is not a leveling up system. So you're not starting at extinguish and working your way up to prevent. It really is about creating solutions in each of these categories. And once you categorize them, choosing what works best for you in that moment. So we wanted to make sure to say that. So I've placed links for you in the chat that will force a copy of our slide deck. And it will also give you a link to our template. And I'm going to show you our template right here, that you can do this on your own. So you can, using Jamboard, type your problems in here, move your sticky notes around based off your horizontal, how frustrating is it, or vertically, how many people are affected. You can then do your empathy map. What does a specific user experiencing that problem think, say, feel, and do? And like Kat suggested, do this with lots of people experiencing the problem. You as the teacher, you as the principal, the student, the parent. So you can do an empathy map to really understand a lot of those issues. Again, your how might we, you're putting out FIRE's framework. And then if you want to actually maybe think about moving forward and taking some steps forward in how to put this solution into practice, you can do a what's a step to try. That's what we call it. So what can you do to implement whichever solution you've selected in 5 days, in 5 weeks, or 5 months? So I've placed links for both of the slide deck and the Jamboard in the chat. We have 2 minutes left. If anybody has any questions, we're happy to answer those for you. You can put them in the chat, or you can unmute and ask us here. Our innovator program has placed the Google Meet link in the chat as well for the next session coming up. So make sure in 2 minutes you hop on over to that one. So does anybody have any questions for us with our last minute left?